Experts have been expecting a fresh Russian offensive for a while now, but certainly not expecting the shakeup in Russia's military leadership that we saw this week. Putin's defense minister for the last 12 years, Sergei Shoigu, is out of the job, and he's been replaced by a civilian economist. What does that tell us about Putin's strategy, and what will it mean for Ukraine under bombardment and losing ground in the region northeast of Kyiv? This week on To The Point, we're looking at Putin's war economy and discussing whether new military leadership will mobilize Russia for a long fight. Hello and welcome. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin, and I'm thrilled to introduce our panel this week. We have Vladimir Esipov, author and a journalist with DW. Nico Lange, senior fellow at the Munich Security Conference. And joining us today from Munich, Marina Miron, a military analyst with King's College London. A warm welcome to you all. Marina, after months of essentially stalemate, we're starting to see some movement again in the war in Ukraine, Russia making gains in the northeast. Is this the new offensive that many analysts were expecting to take place this spring or summer?
Well, I would be very careful as to describe it as the actual offensive. I believe this is just a prelude to the offensive, because what we're seeing now, obviously a new front has been opened in the north, in Kharkiv. There are some talks about the potential of Sumy and Chernihiv also being attacked by Russian forces. However, we see activity along the entire line of contact. So from my perspective, this is just a way that Russia is trying to gain a better position, a more favorable position for itself in order to...
Marina, I'm afraid we just can't hear the last bit of what you're saying, so I would turn over to Nico to pick this up. We had the United States top diplomat Antony Blinken in Kyiv this week, and we know that one senior U.S. official basically acknowledged that this trip was to reassure the Ukrainians. He said this was, quote, a very difficult situation. Can you read between the lines for us here? What is the United States thinking about the situation?
Well, first of all, I would have preferred Secretary Blinken to go to Kharkiv instead of playing guitar in a club. And the situation is difficult also because the US took 6 months of domestic discussions, most of them unrelated to Ukraine at all, to delay the necessary military assistance to Ukraine. So there is some responsibility of the US in a difficult situation. The Ukrainians know themselves that the situation is difficult. The question is what is done to help them, especially with air defense, which seems to be the biggest problem for the Ukrainians. And there, I believe we are still not doing enough.
And we will certainly come to that later in the show. But first, Vladimir, within Russia, we're also seeing big changes as well. Putin has been swapping people out of the top jobs in this reshuffle of the government. And I'm curious why we're seeing this now, even though it seems like things aren't going so badly for Russia.
Well, it was expected for him to make some changes in the government positions, as always after the presidential election. So it was expected that there might be some movements, but besides of the facts who leads the Defense Minister Shoigu, Belousov, or someone else, as long as Vladimir Putin stays in power in Russia, he is the only one who decides what's going on the general front. So talking about in terms of military strategy in the Ukraine, Valery Gerasimov stays in power and the chief of the Russian General Staff. So he decides what's going on the battlefield in the Ukraine. The Belousov is being described as a pragmatical, professional economist, indeed. But as I mentioned already, Putin is the only one who is really deciding the general direction of the Russian politics.
Okay, so we have Putin, in a way, keeping us guessing with what has been the most significant changes to his military command since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And as we've hinted at, even one of Putin's closest allies was not spared in this reshuffle.
Side by side and good friends. That's how Shoigu and Putin presented their relationship for years. 68-year-old Shoigu has overseen the Ministry of Defense since 2012. his time in office saw the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine. But he did not deliver what Putin had hoped for, a quick capture of Kyiv. Now he is being replaced by the civilian Andrei Belousov. Putin hopes that the former Minister of Economic Development will provide a boost to the arms industry in particular. Of course, military technology is changing very quickly. If we want to be successful, we must always be one step ahead. And Shoigu, his new position as Secretary of the National Security Council, replacing Nikolai Patrushev, also a longtime ally of Putin. What is Putin's aim in restructuring the military leadership?
Vladimir, I'd like to talk a little bit more about Shoigu out of that job. Do you think these are ghosts here of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner Group chief, for those who don't remember? He went after Shoigu hard. A year ago, there was a viral video in which he was strongly criticized.
No ghosts of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a history, so it's gone. So it's no topic anymore. And the replacement of Shoigu might have tactical reasons for Russia, but the bigger question is what Putin wants to achieve with the Belousov. And the question is, if Russia is going for a long-haul war, as it mentioned, can Ukraine stand for a long war as well as Russia can? And this is the most important question for the Western public, because if the Western societies, Western countries want to support Ukraine in a long war against Russia, Ukraine needs more supports than now.
So let's speak a little bit about his replacement then. Marina, why do you think we're seeing Putin appointing a civilian, an economist, as his defense minister?
Well, I think that Andrei Belousov has done a very good job in his previous position. And it's certainly somebody who is more scientific and who is also oriented towards more state control of the military industry. And if we're looking at Russia and see how it has behaved during the sanctions, how it impacted the Russian economy, we can see that the sanctions didn't achieve the desired effect, meaning that whatever Belousov was doing, he was doing the right thing. And so from Putin's perspective, what he needs right now is somebody in the Ministry of Defense. He has somebody for the military, as has already been said. Gerasimov remains in his position, but he needs somebody who understands economics and who is able to take care of the military-industrial complex, especially as the defense spending increases, and to integrate it into the overall Russian economy and ensure that it functions efficiently, also perhaps removing those layers of corruption or some layers of corruption which were standing in the way of the proper civil-military cooperation and military innovation.
Nico, what do you think of this? Can Belousov clean up Russia's military complex and make it more efficient, do you think?
First of all, I believe Shoigu is also a civilian. I think he's coming from the emergency services, but he was never an expert in military matters. And Shoigu and Gerasimov, I mean, they have messed up this aggression against Ukraine. No military goals have been achieved, even after 2 years. So from the fact that Gerasimov is staying there, I would draw the conclusion that loyalty is still more important than competence. And Putin has made this movement now, but I would not start with the hypothesis that this will work. I mean, Shoigu had many deficits, but he is a very important part of the system Putin for many years, and he was able to quickly turn a lot of resources around, especially when the initial phase of the invasion got botched and Russia had to go to other plans. So let's see if this really works. And the Russian war economy and the approach to this, I mean, we are hearing a lot about this, and it seems to me part of it at least is information warfare. What I see is old tanks getting out of storage, being refurbished, being thrown to the battlefield and destroyed very quickly. So I think from a Western point of view, we should not be afraid of Russia waging a long war. We have enough resources if we want to outproduce Russia and to give Ukraine everything it needs. And also the effort northwest of Kyiv seems to me more like a supporting effort to the information campaign and the air campaign targeted at getting the population in Kharkiv and maybe Sumy and Chernihiv to leave the cities. But it's not something that where I would expect serious military results from the Russian side.
But just to make things clear, if I understand you correctly, you think this does indeed signal that Putin is digging in for a long war of attrition. And the fact that he's an economist, does this not signal the fact that Putin is trying to find someone who can really put the economy at the service of the defense industry?
The Putin is digging in for a long war. I think that is clear since April or May 2022, when the initial plan did not work out. But there's nothing to be afraid of from our point of view. No military goals of the Russian side have been achieved so far, and I think we can make sure that also the new military goals will not be achieved. What I think is changing is that Russia is more successful now in the information campaign and is trying to create a picture that it's hopeless to defend against Russia and that Russia will win and the war economy is running. And it seems that is impressing many people, including here in Germany and in the West in general.
Vladimir, is that also your opinion? Do you think we should be afraid of Belousov and what he can do with Russia's economy?
You should not be afraid of Belousov, not at all. You should be afraid of being not clear about your goals, because it's contradictory signals getting from Europe. On the one side, there's a lot of talks about delivering Taurus to the Ukraine, delivering more weapons. And as it faces the reality, there is no Taurus delivering to the Ukraine, no more weapons. And Ukraine facing a huge lack of manpower as well. So it's not only about weapon systems from the West, but a lack of manpower inside of Ukraine, which is a problem with what NATO can solve for the Ukraine. So it's a contradictory positions, contradictory signals going from the West. On the one side, you're supporting Ukraine, on the other side, not really. And this is what should be faced by the Western societies.
Okay, let's take a closer look at the situation in the northeast of Ukraine. Clearly, it is in a dangerous position here, with Russian forces pushing across its northeastern border and taking, over the past week, control of more land every day than they have since the start of the war.
The region north of Kharkiv is under constant fire. Soldiers are getting the remaining people out of their homes one after the other. Come on, let's go. Only take your documents. They can only take the bare essentials, not knowing if and when they'll be able to return. In eastern Ukraine lies Vovchansk, directly on the front line. It's not far from Kharkiv, which is home to millions. Of the once 19,000 inhabitants, only 500 remain. You lie down and wonder, will they kill me now or in an hour? For those 500, it could now be their last chance to flee from the Russian troops. Their homeland has become the focal point of the current fighting. We drove through the city center. I can't see it without crying. Everything is trembling. The Russian army is testing the Ukrainian resistance at several points of the front. Can the weakened soldiers withstand the Russian attacks?
So we have thousands of Ukrainians evacuating from the Kharkiv region. Nico, many of them are reporting that this second Russian invasion is for them even worse than the first one at the start of the war. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you think we're seeing unfold here?
Well, Russia has been telegraphing this for a long time. The air attacks in a new intensity on Kharkiv and also partly on Sumy and Chernihiv started some weeks ago. So this was clear that this would come. And it's the right move by the Ukrainians to evacuate certain villages, to have a defense position somewhere deeper in the country and to defend there. But of course, this will lead, and it led for the last days, for Russia being seen as taken territory. But it took most of the territory because Ukraine evacuated the villages. Now that the real defense started on the Ukrainian side and Ukraine also pulled in reserves and used more fortified positions, Russia, for the last 2 days, is having more difficulties, is suffering very heavy losses. And I think Russia has to decide now whether to pull in reserves to continue this, whether it continue with its plans to do similar efforts in the Sumy region. But let's be clear here. This is a supporting effort to what is going on in general. And the Russian attacks near Chasiv Yar and other places in the east, they continue at the same time while this is going on. And stretching the Ukrainian defenses thin, spreading the Ukrainian resources, that is, in effect, I think, that Russia is achieving.
Marina, is that also what you think is going on here? Put this into perspective for us. As how do you think Russian troops were able to advance so far and so quickly in the northeast?
Well, on the
I'm afraid we've got technical issues here again. So, Vladimir, if you could, I'd ask you to jump in for that question, too. What do you think happened? What went wrong here in Ukraine's defenses?
I'm not sure that something went wrong because Ukraine is on the limits because Ukraine put huge resources to these defense lines. And the front line was almost more than 1,000 kilometers long. Now we have a new piece of this fighting, as Nico mentioned already. So Ukraine faces, as I mentioned already, dramatical lacks of the manpower. It needs more weapons from the West, more resources and more manpower, more mobilization, more troops on this. And this is just another one problem for the Ukrainian government. So Zelensky canceled his trip to Europe yesterday. He was supposed to go to Spain and Portugal. He canceled it on a short notice because of this complicated situation on the front. So even if it's only just Russian informational warfare what's facing in Kharkiv, it's being treated very seriously by the President Zelensky.
And indeed, we even heard a Ukrainian commander criticizing this as, quote, terrible border defenses. Marina, let's see if we can bring you back in here. What's your view why Ukrainian defenses weren't better prepared?
Well, there are many reasons for that, and we have seen that Ukraine also has a problem of corruption, as was the former Defense Minister Reznikov. So I'm not sure what exactly happened, but apparently the defenses that were supposed to be constructed haven't been constructed in the way expected. And so the logical thing that has been done by Ukrainian troops is fall back and let the Russians enter. This is why we have seen this rapid advance by the Russian forces. Notwithstanding, of course, it has drawn the attention of the Ukrainian command and the necessity to decide where to send the reinforcements. Do we stay in Chasiv Yar or do we send them to Kharkiv? And I think that was a plan altogether to divert the attention from more important directions. Because if we look at the map, what the Russians are trying to do is that they're trying to cut off Ukrainian troops and cut through the grouping if they can get to Kurahovo, Selidovo. So I think that the idea here is to develop the breakthroughs that they had in Ocheretino, west of Avdiivka, in order to get then further west. And the point that I'm talking about specifically is Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. And Kharkiv, for now, I think, is more of a distraction because they just don't have the manpower and they are not going to commit resources to take Vovchansk, do a frontal assault on Vovchansk or a frontal assault on Kharkiv.
Okay, so ultimately meant to spread Ukraine's forces thin. Nico, we've mentioned Blinken was on that unannounced visit to Kyiv this week. There, he said U.S. weapons will make a real difference. Where are these weapons? Do you think so too?
There are some of them are there, and if they are there, they make a real difference. And we can see that the new version of ATACMS, the ground-based precision fire, makes a difference on Crimea. That's the only region where Ukraine can still put some pressure on the Russians, and it does that. And very significant, I think, attacks have been conducted there. So yes, US weapons make a difference. Still, Blinken did not answer the question on what is the strategy of the US? Does the US want Ukraine to help Ukraine to push Russia, or is it just this kind of slow death recipe that the White House was perceiving as a strategy? And I think, on the one hand, the White House strategy of denying Russia achieving its war aims has been a success. On the other hand, many in Ukraine have the feeling the dripping of support is a recipe for a slow death of Ukraine. And I think it's up to the White House to make a different strategic choice. We hear that now a new package is formed immediately after this one, so maybe there is some speeding up, and Jake Sullivan alluded to higher speed of deliveries. But there's always a big difference between deliveries being announced and having a communicative effect and deliveries really arriving to the troops in Ukraine.
Yeah, these things take time, don't they? Vladimir, do you think Russia's taking advantage of this window where Ukraine is still waiting on deliveries?
Absolutely, because this delivery delay of many months was so huge that Russia obviously would take advantage of this situation. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Now, Nico, you were chief of staff to a German defense minister from the Conservative Party until 2022, and you've recently suggested that allies could protect the sky over Ukraine from NATO countries like Romania, like Poland. Can you tell us a little bit how that would work in your view?
Well, we have a lot of air defense systems at the eastern border of NATO, which is also the eastern border of the European Union. And I think we should use them to shoot down any Russian drones and missiles that are in range. That would at least cover 70 to 90 kilometers into airspace in the western part of Ukraine. It would free up Ukrainian air defense assets that could be brought to Kyiv, to Dnipro, to Zaporizhia, where they are desperately needed. And under Article 51 of the UN Charter, it's perfectly legal to do it. And we have seen that this kind of escalatory assumption that many had in the West, it's just empirically not true. I mean, if the Moskva has been sunk, if the Black Sea Fleet headquarters has been attacked by cruise missiles, so what are we afraid of? We should just do it.
I mean, this is exactly the argument that some from the center-left have made, that it would be escalatory. Marina, though, I would like to get your view here, because as we've said, it appears like there is some support for this idea, both within the German government and the opposition. What chances do you think a plan like that would actually have of becoming reality?
So there are many different scenarios to this. The first scenario is, of course, we're looking at, from our perspective, as Nico said, that would be legitimate under the Article 51 of the UN Charter. But does Russia actually care how we perceive it and whether it's legitimate from the Russian point of view? Those air defense systems in Romania would become a legitimate military target for the Russians. So the question here is, what will happen if the Russians actually start destroying those air defense systems on Romanian territory? How will NATO act? Will Article 5 of collective self-defense be invoked in such a scenario? And I think those are important questions to think through. Also, another point is, just because we haven't seen any escalation, and I know that Putin has threatened many times, does it mean that he's not willing to use at least tactical nuclear weapons? And I think the signal here has been clear. So what would happen if he was to use tactical nuclear weapons, even to Russia's detriment? Would then NATO react in kind? If we look at NATO having nuclear weapons, France has its own nuclear weapons. Some are stationed in Germany, those are US. What would happen in such a scenario? How would NATO act? And the more strategic question is it going to essentially help Ukraine? Because that's only one part of the equation, protecting that airspace. Because you cannot protect all of Ukrainian territory with those air defense systems. And of course, in technical terms, you can evade air defenses, or Russian missiles could potentially evade air defenses, such as their cruise missiles. Or we're seeing the difficulties with the new FABs, which are outfitted with an electromagnetic warfare kit to make them much more difficult to intercept and to detect. So the question is it going to make a huge difference?
All right, let's pick it up there with Vladimir and get some final thoughts. Your view on what Marina has just said.
Look, the worst part fighting of this wars is not in the west of the Ukraine. The worst parts in the east, on the front line. And these air defense systems from the Romania and Poland and other NATO countries will not have in any way to protect Kyiv, because it's too far from there, and not protect anything in the eastern part of the Ukraine. So it's a highly symbolical step. It's a highly provocative step as well. I agree with Marina with the strategical consequences of this, with the question if Russia will hit this rocket air defense system in NATO countries, how NATO would react to this. I think it's setting the stakes even higher I think it's a clear step to the direct escalation between Russia and NATO countries, but it's very provocative in terms of medial effect.
Now, just last thoughts, Nico, we'll give you a chance to respond there. And also, I'd love if you could tell us what lessons you think the West should take away when it's looking at these indicators we've discussed of Putin's strategy going forward.
I think we have to think along new ways, and if we are continuing to be afraid of what is going on in Putin's mind, I'm afraid then we are not able to win against him.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm very pleased to have this panel of guests with their insights today. Vladimir Esipov, Marina, Miron, and Nico Lange. Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you at home for watching if you're watching on YouTube. But let us know what you thought in the comments, and hope to see you next time.